Good morning. This is our ninth Agile seminar on attendance, which feels amazing to say that. I'm so pleased today to be joined by three excellent colleagues from the Chiltern Learning Trust. We've got with us today Adrian Rogers, who is CEO of Chiltern Learning Trust, Sufian Sadiq, who is the head of the teaching hub. Is it a teaching hub? Sufian, did I get that right?
Yeah, teaching school.
Teaching school, that's right. And then Tom Bellwood, who is behavior and attendance lead at Chiltern Learning Trust. And today you're going to hear about the 5 core principles to raising attendance, which were used to such good effect at Denbigh High School that they were chosen as one of the DFE's 32 attendance hubs. And I should say that Tom also advises the DFE on behavior, and he represents Chiltern on the DFE's attendance task force for improving attendance. I'm going to hand over to Adrian, who wants to do a little intro.
Thanks, Samira. It's lovely to join everyone. Just really to say that Sufian and I will be in the background. Tom is the star of the show and is the expert. My only hint to anyone on the call is it's being absolutely relentless. It's being absolutely relentless with the routines, and I'm sure you've heard that before. And we've got 18 schools in our trust, and they're at varying stages because of that relentlessness and that insistence on high standards. So Tom will be the star of the show, and perhaps Sufian and I will try and do the chat for you, Samira, as well, and keep things moving so that Tom doesn't have to multitask too much. But it's lovely to be here, and thanks for inviting us.
Well, we'll dive straight in, if that's okay, to everybody. So, as you all are probably well aware, as everyone said, we are an attendance hub, and we at Chiltern Learning Trust are quite research-driven. So we obviously knew we had schools with strong attendance based on their attendance figures. And we, as Adrian said, we're just quite a relentless organization in general. We take a lot of systems and processes on board, and we just on the day-to-day just crack on with what we do. However, we did see, as everyone did post-COVID, big changes in attendance within specific schools and specific cohorts, and we dialed down really. And as attendance and as we as an organisation grew, with as Adrian said, with a number of schools, we had to create a model that was sustainable, that was going to be transferable across to any school across any phase. And that meant, as I said, researching beyond our trust. So we visited lots of other attendance hubs, schools with fantastic attendance, as well as lent on practices in our own outstanding schools in order to create something that was then usable with new schools that joined us and existing schools, and also things that we've given back to the sector, which we'll touch upon later. We all know why attendance is important. It is arguably the number one biggest factor in student outcomes and in terms of their life chances. And it also plays a huge part, particularly for schools that serve disadvantaged areas. We know that since the pandemic, attendance nationally has dipped. Prior COVID, attendance was sitting roughly in primaries around 96% and roughly just below 95% in secondary schools. However, not only it wasn't only just COVID that played a big part in the fact that attendance has shifted. Cultural changes within and societal changes have played a big impact. The rise of remote working has aided the change in social contracts between parents and school. Increasing mental health crisis or cases, particularly with young children, has risen significantly, and we also as a trust feel that the rise in social media and the rise in smartphone usage and smart device usage at home plays a part in that. And to top all that off, you've got the cost of living crisis that also plays a part in the fact that sometimes parents can't afford the things they used to be able to afford, even if they are double working parents. So there is lots of different kind of interchangeable things that have led to why attendance has become such a big priority and such a big problem nationally. We know that the landscape of attendance generally has gotten worse because the data suggests it. Primary schools are still outperforming secondaries, which again, when we get into the core principles, we think that there's a reason behind that in general. Special schools even though traditionally always struggled with attendance due to their clientele, has dipped significantly. Students who are disadvantaged or vulnerable are really struggling in terms of in comparison to other students who are not disadvantaged or non-vulnerable. And also there's the rise in PA and SA shows that it's particular families that are really struggling with attendance across the board as well. So as I said before, we're not a silo. We have worked quite closely with lots of different organizations to create this approach, as well as really honing in on the schools that do fantastic work within our own organization. So the 5 core principles are, firstly, whole school culture and the approach to attendance, and why having a particular culture within school is vital for improving attendance. Principle 2 looks at defining roles and responsibilities, so being really clear and having the clarity of what everyone's job is in the organization around attendance, and making sure that's really well communicated. Principle 3, obviously, systems and procedures, which play a part in the day-to-day operational running of attendance, and how to make sure that they're strategically being used, and you're leveraging the best possible systems you can to get the best outcome. Principle 4 is around targeted support. So how do we work with those specifically identified groups and support them improving their attendance? And finally, and possibly the thing that allows all this to happen, is that data analysis and that quality assurance, and making sure, as Adrian alluded to at the start, you are relentless with understanding how to improve attendance in your school. So what do we mean by whole school culture? Well, what we talk about at Chiltern Learning Trust is our core values. What do we stand for? And are they deeply ingrained in everything that we do? And we touch upon the work of Patrick Lencioni, and some of you may know him and his work around the 5 dysfunctions of a team and the ideal team player and those types of things. And essentially, core values are the cornerstone of you as an organization. What do you stand for? And what we found in doing our research is that having a school that really understands its purpose, its USP, its unique selling point, and really creates a safe environment, so actually really supports improving attendance. It's probably, apart from the children coming into school, it's the second key driver in having children turn up to school. They feel safe, they feel like they belong. And looking at the research behind this, particularly from Impact Ed, there is one of the highest percentages in terms of why students come to school is from a report of over 30,000 students, is that they felt safe when they came to school. They felt like they belonged when they came to school. And interestingly, from this study, as you can see on the screen, it says nearly all students understood if they missed school that there would be consequences. However, the interesting thing about this study is it compares the top 20% of attending students, so a lot of the 100% attending students, with the bottom 20% attending students. And out of the top 20%, the majority of them felt like they were a part of the school. And it was one of the highest recorded answers of why they came to school. They felt a part of it. They felt like they belonged. And that was really, really important. And as other national statistics state, that's really important, particularly for girls, and particularly for girls who have either a special need or are vulnerable, which we'll get into in a moment as well. So as I said, the research looked at the differences between the top 20% attending and the bottom 20%. And what's really interesting in the research is there's arguably a huge, it's probably, what would you say? It's not, it wouldn't be unreasonable to understand why, but there's a big disparity between why students who are attending and not attending. I think what's a really interesting, when you dig into it deeper, is the difference between PA children and non-PA children around why they don't come to school, and the difference in terms of feeling safe within school, and the 14% difference there. There's a big difference, as I said, between boys and girls, and safety was probably a number one factor of why they don't come to school. And it had an impact of around 3% in unstructured time as well. So when you think about where students are feeling unsafe in school, it wasn't in lesson times. They were talking around being unsafe coming to school and leaving school, break and lunches, unstructured times, and transitions around school between lessons. So they're things that we as a trust really try to, things that we can impact quite significantly. We have blue jackets, which, I've got mine on the back of my chair. We're very visible. We're out in the community before school, after school. We go to the places where we know students will congregate. So we'll be in parks, we'll be in shops. So we really make sure that we as a trust are very, very visible in order to make sure students feel safe. In lessons, we have a lot of, we expect that staff are on their doors, are on threshold, and then breaks and lunches, we have a huge number of staff on duty in their blue jackets. And also the trust has a financial model of how they pay staff if they want to do a lunch duty that's across all our schools that really supports staff being out and about. So we really try to ensure that we can leverage everything we can to make students feel safe. We also understand that there's a lot of push and pull factors of how to get students in and out of school. And a couple of the things that came out around core values is, do you understand your contextual safe attendance, i.e. there's something specific about where you work as a school. So for example, in some of our schools, we've got an all boys school, an all girls school. The reasons why those groups might not be attending school will be different to each other because our schools are different, because we serve slightly different demographics and slightly different student makeups. We have to be understanding that not everyone sits on the national trend. You have contextual attendance issues as well that you need to be aware of. How well do you push staff training to understand the values of the school and how they permeate through? And does everyone understand those? And is that part of a curriculum that is delivered across the year? How well do you discuss and celebrate attendance as a school? Do you discuss it with families? Do you discuss it with students? Do you discuss it trust-wide, etc.? And how well do you get others involved in the discussion around attendance? Do you listen to students about why they're struggling to attend? Do you listen to families and support them to be able to come into school? So as our first area, really looking at how, as a school, your culture around attendance and what is that like, and is it a top priority? Then principle number 2 looks at that really understanding everyone's specific role. What's really clear is in the most high performing of teams and high performing organizations, there is consistency in approach of day-to-day operational activities, but people are really clear on what they're expected to do. There's no gray areas, and therefore there's no one that is missed. And when you look at the most high performing teams and organizations and schools, there's a real clear understanding of roles. So we make sure that we start with leadership at the top. We understand that the head teacher has to take a really active role in attendance. They're driving attendance as a head. And they have really detailed expectations of everybody who sits beneath them. And that's really, for us, in our trust policy on attendance, we have a section on roles and responsibilities that schools are made really, really clear of what everybody's duties are. That is not a prescribed model, i.e. every school follows these one duties, because again, we're aware that not all schools have the same capacity of individuals. In a small primary school, the ability to have 8 layers of attendance of people is very different to our largest secondary school, which has a lot more capacity to be able to deliver. However, what is important is, regardless of your structure, everyone is very, very clear on their roles and responsibilities, and everybody plays a part. And the only way you get that clarity is through leaders understanding it, leaders pushing it, and leaders demonstrating it. So we talk about how do we create that clarity, and how do we really get those expectations at all levels? Well, we do a few things. One, we're clear on the roles. So we tell people, we write it down, we give it to them, and we say, this is your job. We train them in their job. So people aren't, if we've got a new attendance officer or a new head of year or a new assistant principal who oversees that area, they're not just like, yep, well done, congratulations, you've got the job and you come. There's a package of support around them, and we make sure that the training that is offered both internally as a school, but trust-wide through trust leaders is there to support them in their job. And not only that, it's the monitoring accountability that ensures that loop is closed. Our leaders going in and checking that the people who they, that the systems and processes they've got are working, but also that the people are doing the jobs that they need to do. And we find using this approach, we get that consistency within the school in the first place. And then over time, the results come. Just because you have these things in place doesn't necessarily mean tomorrow 100% of kids are going to turn up. I wish it did. It doesn't always work that way. And then when we move on to system 3, we we really are a systems driven organization. You know, everything is written down, everything has a process. There's no gaps in what we try to do. So we really codify our day 1 to day 3 process of what's expected. And we also codify our vulnerable section. So a vulnerable does not mean a student has an SEND, or not only do they have an SEND or an EHCP, or are on our CP list or on our LAC list. Our vulnerable list is also contextual to us, to our schools. So, for example, there might be a student who's had a bereavement. They might come onto our vulnerable list, and therefore that they will be part of the vulnerable flowchart just as much as a student with an EHCP or a CP plan. There might be other factors surrounding that student. There might be an issue in the community. Something's happened within their local area that they've been exposed to. They might come onto our vulnerable list as well. So we are really clear that our vulnerable list is not just around them having a identified vulnerability. It's something that our schools use as a mechanism to be able to say, to know there's something that might cause that student a reason not to attend school. We also have checklists for pastoral leaders. So we have this huge impetus on empowering our leaders and making sure through those defining those roles and responsibilities, there's no wait time. One of the issues with attendance is you have to react very, very quickly. You know, from a day 1 absence, the quicker you react, if you look at the statistics of the students who were PA in week 1, 55% of students who are PA in week 1 are also PA in week 32 of school. So the quicker you can get in on those students to stop them from dropping into certain categories, the less likely they are at the end of the year to have fallen behind. And the only way we can do that is reduce lag time. And by reducing lag time, it means you have to empower all those people in those roles and responsibilities to be able to do their job, not micromanage them, empower them through training, through support, and through processes, so that they are able to deliver levels of support without having to escalate quickly or wait for a leader to make a decision. So in order to do that, we create lots of interventions, lots of support packages, lots of steps that leaders can take, particularly at middle leader level, or in, as I said, in a primary school at a more operational level, where they can turn up to a strategic meeting with the leader and say, look, we've done all these things. Let's look at the targeted support, which we'll move on to in a moment. We're also very clear that attendance isn't just, there's always a reason behind attendance. And one of our clear processes is around getting to the why the student hasn't attended, rather than just, you know, ticking a box to say they were ill. Why have they not attended? And this comes down to our tracking in our schools, making sure we're really clear. We identify our subgroups, which is what I referred to earlier as our contextual attendance issues within our school. We look at the national picture as well, because some of the trends we do fall into, just the same as everyone else, particularly SEND girls and Key Stage 4. However, we look at our contextual safeguarding. What are our subgroups within our own schools? So, for example, the one on the board, obviously, children at alternative provision, they play their attendance, as we know, looking at special school national data could be a challenge, as well as in one of our schools, a group of year 11 boys, they were a challenge in terms of their attendance. So we identify those, that there are subgroups really early. We know our trends. We make sure we communicate through our channels of roles and responsibilities, who's doing what, who's picking up which groups, and what work is going on. And based on line management meetings, particularly with our middle leaders, or as I said, depending on in primary schools, our subgroups are probably not as varied. We're looking at those actions which are written on these documents, and we're reviewing them to make sure that the students can be supported to turn up. We know nationally that there's the trends that are occurring, as we said. One, the sense of belonging, and the students who feel safer are more likely to attend. Other areas, we know that students with a vulnerability are less likely to attend. We also know that there's a second transition that has been noted nationally between year 7 and year 8, and the research in our Denbigh school, our attendance hub school, is we were looking at the wraparound support that year 7s get that then disappears when they go to year 8. So traditionally, we have this real big package that the first 6 weeks, they have a really intensive package to support them coming into school. They may also have a separate lunchtime. They may also be segregated from their older peers. They have a really strong head of year who also manages transition. They have consistent teachers, sometimes some of the strongest teachers. in the school. So there's a real, and we really unpicked why were our year 7s in particular having high attendance and then that dipping in year 8. And we're looking at some of our operational just practices in our schools to make sure that we can buck that trend. And we also, as we said before, understand that people, that girls particularly with a need, they are one of our subgroups as well that don't attend nationally. So how do we manage those subgroups, as we call them, in terms of we have an approach to all subgroups. You know, they're not just bespoke. And it goes in 3 stages. Our first one is our listening and understanding. So we look at ownership of our subgroups. So there's always someone who, when they come to our strategic meetings, has the oversight of that group and is managing the strategy behind that group. So we always give ownership to one of our leaders and their roles and responsibilities. That may vary. So particularly year 11 at Denbigh, I know that the head teacher takes ownership of that group because of the outcomes on it, and they really drive that subgroup. Whereas another subgroup may be, you know, in year 10, SEND, that might be a Senko who takes over that ownership. However, somebody has ownership of that group and make sure others are doing the targeted support. We gather lots of voice around these students. So we go out into our communities. We hold lots of community events to make sure the community feel like they're part of the school, while also gathering that kind of information from our community around what works and what barriers are you seeing. Obviously, we find that because of the amount of data we gather and the hard and soft data, which I'll go to in a minute, helps us intervene early, and we really understand our own contextual information. Our level 2 is our empathize and support. So how do we support our families in coming in? Well, it starts with our staff training, understanding that when our leaders are having, or our staff are having conversations with our families, they're able to relate to what's going on with them. You know, if we've got a student, say, who's got, like we said earlier, bereavement, if our staff aren't trained in how to manage that situation, they're not going to support that family in getting that student in. So the staff training is really, really important. Understanding how to escalate when necessary. So as we said, we go through our checklist at all levels of what everyone's expected to do. And then, you know, without having to talk to anyone, at this point, I now need to escalate to this leader who can put this package of support in. We are creative with some families, particularly around medical needs of students. You know, at Denbigh High School, pivoted really quickly around the mental health crisis and then hired 2 members of staff whose sole responsibility is around mental health in order to mentor and support those students. And then it's been also about being creative about when you hold those sessions. So making sure if you've noticed that on a Friday, one of the students is not in, or on a Monday, you might hold their mentoring session on that day, so that then they're more likely to come in because they love their mentoring. And just being really systematic in that support, making sure that no one falls through the net, that all students are given that opportunity to be supported. And then also we do fine. You know, we do not tolerate certain behaviors from families. We make sure that what we're going to do is well communicated. You know, we send out, you know, the plan. If you fall below, 96%, you are going to get a warning. If you fall below 93%, you're going to get a warning. If you don't keep up at 93%, you will have a meeting. We're really clear with families, like, this is what will happen if you don't meet our expectation. And over communicating that, not just sending that out or giving that out in a leaflet in year 7 parents evening, sending that out regularly through comms, using all the channels we have, letters, emails, apps, parents evening, open evenings, coffee, every opportunity, we thrust that into our families' faces so they know these are our expectations. Line management meetings looks at the support. So you'll see on that other picture with all our data, all those students will be spoke about in line management meetings around, okay, what is going on with the attendance? Let's look at your subgroups in your year group or your house. What are you doing with those students? Is it working? Is it not working? What do we need to do? Making sure, particularly when we're getting to that high, like the defining area, who's in charge of what and who's doing what, who's communicating with the LA, and that end bit is probably the most clear in our schools because it always sits with our overarching leader of attendance. And yes, we do follow the legal process if we have to, and we do fine families, and if we need to take them to court, then we do. And then the final principle is that really understanding your data. We know that Ofsted are keen to identify patterns in attendance as well, and they really want a system and approach around targeting attendance and what we have to do to improve attendance. That's not why we do it, but it is important to know that when you are, audited and questioned, that they will be asking these questions. So what we look at, again, is gathering two sources of data, and our quality assurance is we gather our hard data, which I'll go through in a sec, our soft data, and then that quality assurance and analysis makes us really get to the nitty gritty of what's going on with 99% of our families. Don't get me wrong, there are always complex cases like everywhere. So what do I mean by hard data? Well, these are the really easy things to measure. Our kind of, what is our overarching attendance information, our daily information. Our head teachers get daily updates around who's in, who's not in, the total number of attendance, subgroup attendance, what that looks like. We analyze our day 1 to 3 processes and figures, and who's crept into from day 1 to day 2, and what process, where we are in those systems. Subgroup check, as I said. Our trackers, which you'd seen on the previous page, look at the interventions that are put in place, and are they the right interventions. And obviously we hold half-termly meetings, termly meetings around attendance that are not only looked at school level, but at trust level. And we have attendance on a page for a lot of our schools in terms of literally overview of where we're at, just moment in time where we're at. Soft data, we do a lot of questionnaires with families, with students, with staff. We have a lot of community meetings. As I said, we host lots of community events where we get the community in, coffees and food banks and things like that, to really just gather that information from families. Obviously, there are student and parent meetings, particularly when they drop into certain categories. We gather the whys of what's going on. We do use our EWOs and support, although within a lot of our local areas that support is diminishing, and we're looking at methods of how we can gather that support internally to be able to make sure that service doesn't disappear. As well as we still lean on CAMS, we still lean on our youth offending teams, because all this information plays a big part in our attendance. We can't just have our operational people for attendance going out and not knowing that that certain students are particularly vulnerable in particular areas. So that's really, really important to get that whole picture on our students. And then, we quality assure as well. We have a checklist for schools, and that they've developed over time working with other hubs, and an attendance toolkit for us as a trust of how we go in and evaluate attendance at a whole school level. So the internal checklist is for schools to use to make sure they know everything about their own schools. And then we also have a trust-wide audit that we do to be able to measure our schools against each other.